Good evening and welcome back to MesmePolitics. My name is Toby Lepati Mesme. It's just gone 7 p.m. on Tuesday, the 29th of December 2020, and we are with you live for the next half hour with another show bringing you all the latest in UK and US politics from a leftist perspective. Get in touch in the chat. Come and say hello. How's your day going? What stories do you want us to talk about? What topics do you want us to delve more in depth into? All of that and more we can do for you. I often say it, but the fact we're live basically means, why not get involved? It's a unique, I might as well just record this 5 years ago, unless you're going to come say hello. So come say hello. We would love you to get involved. On tonight's show, we've got a lot going on. Coming up to 7:30, we are going to be talking about the UK government, talking about getting some drones, presumably to kill people, which is just lovely, isn't it? They're going very Barack Obama on us. We'll be talking about that. And probably ranting about that would be the more accurate way of putting it. Very much leaving Fortress Europe to create Fortress Britain. Joe Biden hits out at the Trump administration. Going to be talking about that in a bit. Of course, we are dealing with very silly people in the Trump administration. We'll talk about how serious are the concerns that the Trump administration are obstructing the incoming Biden administration in terms of the transition. And even if they are, how much does it actually matter? We discuss. But now, at the top of the hour, COVID-19 is out of control across the UK. We're heading for the worst point of the pandemic. The worst is very much ahead, not behind. We have a feckless political class devoid of ideas of how we get out of this, how we get from here to a better place. And the whole thing's a mess, really. We discuss. I don't think anyone would try and argue anything else other than that the government's handling of this whole thing has been absolute chaos. But the question is, how do we get from where we are now forwards? What's likely to happen? What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? But of course, also alongside that, what should we be doing? What won't the government do, but what should they be doing? It's a very fraught topic. A lot to discuss because the whole thing, as I say, is an absolute mess. Going into some headlines here. English secondary schools unlikely to fully open until mid-January at the earliest. Secondary schools in England unlikely to fully reopen until after mid-January at the earliest, according to new plans being thrashed out within the government that would see school staff be given high priority for COVID vaccinations. According to government sources, ministers are torn between heeding its scientific advisors over the rapid spread of the new COVID variant and warnings from the Department for Education that switching to remote learning for the whole of January would make it hard for schools and colleges to reopen again before Easter, jeopardising next year's exams. So the revised timetable being discussed would see only older students who are taking exams, such as A-levels and GCSEs, receiving remote learning for the week from the 4th of January, effectively giving most secondary pupils an extra week's holiday, while schools and colleges gear up to carry out mass testing. Meanwhile, further coronavirus restrictions could be introduced in England akin to a Tier 5 lockdown, a government source has suggested, as experts warn the current curbs might not be enough to shrink the epidemic. Tier 4 restrictions came into force in London and parts of the southeast and the east of England on 20th of December and have since been extended to a swathe of the country, from Cambridgeshire to Sussex to parts of Hampshire. Under these restrictions, of course, people have been told to stay at home, with household mixing banned outside support bubbles, although one person can meet up with one other person outdoors. And just to pile on the bad news, an analysis of the spread of the new highly transmissible coronavirus variant by experts at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine released this month, warned that even if the whole of England were placed under restrictions on Boxing Day until the end of January, the R value would not fall below 1, and that's if it was Tier 4 grade restrictions. So there could be plans to introduce much stricter measures. We're not clear on what Tier 5 would be, but we are quite clear that the government are in the process of considering something akin to a Tier 5. Let's hear the latest from a news report earlier summarising the state of play.
Well, good morning. It's a Tuesday, the 29th of December. Our main story for you. Hospitals in England are now treating more coronavirus patients than at any other point in the pandemic, as numbers surpass the peak that was seen in April.
It once again shows the stress that the NHS is under, with the head of NHS England saying that health workers are back in the eye of the storm. Keith Doyle reports.
Health services across the UK are being stretched as they deal with increasing numbers of patients with COVID. In London, accident and emergency departments are reporting intense pressure. In Scotland, doctors say there's a danger that services will be overwhelmed. In Wales, the situation in hospitals is described as incredibly challenging. And in Northern Ireland, the health minister said the next few days is a crucial period. The stark messages show the impact the COVID virus is having.
I was on Christmas Day and it was wall-to-wall COVID. So we see patients who are coming in who have COVID symptoms, but we also see other patients coming in with other problems who turn out to be COVID positive. And between that, there is a great deal of difficulty getting those patients through into the wards.
In England, the number of people being treated for the virus in hospital is over 20,000, higher than the previous peak of around 19,000 in April, although more testing is being done now than it was then. Over 41,000 new cases were reported yesterday, a record with 357 deaths. NHS providers said some trusts were reporting up to 3 times the number of COVID patients than at the peak of the first wave. The pressure is having a real effect. In many hospitals, the rising number of COVID patients means staff are being redeployed and more routine operations and procedures are being postponed.
Sadly, it's inevitable that as the infections rise and the admissions rise, that actually we see disruption to other services. We're desperate, our members are desperate to keep that disruption as low as possible. But unfortunately, some of our elective and planned services will be disrupted, both in hospitals and in other settings as well.
Acknowledging the work that health workers are doing, the head of the NHS in England has given a message to staff who he said have had a very tough year.
By late spring, we think that with vaccine supply continuing to come on stream, we will have been able to offer all vulnerable people across this country this COVID vaccination. And that perhaps provides the biggest chink of hope for the year ahead.
Tomorrow, the tier levels in England will be reviewed. Across the UK, health ministers have pleaded with people to stay home for New Year's, sticking to the restrictions in place. The challenges for the health services over the next days and weeks are immense. Keith Doyle, BBC News.
So the state of play is looking pretty dire. Where do we go from here? How are things looking? Well, we're heading for the worst point, guys. So the beginning of 2021, possibly the first few months of 2021 are going to be, it looks, the worst point of this pandemic in the UK. Worse than earlier in the year, being the negative point, the positive point there being it probably won't be that bad ever again, but we are heading to an extremely, extremely dark winter heading into spring. A really dark January, a really dark February. This will be awful. There's no two ways around it. This whole thing is awful, but we're going to see overflowing hospitals, we're going to see rising death tolls, we're going to see suffering, and as a result of that we're also going to see increased restrictions which have a cumulative effect on people's mental health, on children's education, and all these myriad other things. There's no good thing here. There's nothing good about closing schools. There's nothing good about having to stay home. But these things are going to become necessary as we head into this. We've had no leadership. I'm not angry at the virus. The reason I'm not angry at the virus is if we had a competent political class in this country, we could be COVID-free as an island. There's no reason we wouldn't be. We have had zero leadership. We have a toothless opposition, and we have a feckless, rudderless, dangerously incompetent government. We have separatists in power in Scotland. We have a government in Wales that has nowhere near enough powers to make a substantial difference. And we have a centralised diktat from Whitehall, where the government is essentially making decisions on behalf of the whole of the UK with no idea what it's like beyond the M45. So we're in a really bad place. And the reality is we are going to need a full, and we only needed one lockdown. The only one lockdown was absolutely necessary. Beyond that, these things could have been mitigated. These things could have been prevented. But the reality is, we're going to need a full, deep lockdown. Possibly the worst lockdown we've had going into January. And the only way we prevent ourselves, until we get herd immunity from the vaccine, if that is a thing that will happen, the only way to prevent an endless cycle of lockdowns is to, during this lockdown, learn the lessons we didn't learn from the first, and learn the lessons we didn't learn during the second, and actually put in place publicly owned test, trace, isolate, local public health officials in charge of that, comprehensive economic support, trial a universal basic income, so everyone has a living wage during lockdown if we're asking people to literally stay in their homes. We need a zero COVID strategy, a plan modelled on countries that have been successful in this to eliminate the virus. And we need provisions for people's mental health. We need provisions for people's education at home. We need to see one of the most comprehensive packages of support and mitigation that any government has put forward in the world. It's perfectly within our power. We can afford it. We can logistically do it. But what it takes is some creative thinking from Whitehall and some willingness from the government that has failed abjectly. It's time for them to admit that their method of dealing with this has failed and to try something else. And if you're really not keen on lockdowns, I understand. Of course I understand. But I'm telling you this. I'm on a level with you, right? Person to person right now. If you don't want endless lockdowns, advocate my approach. Okay? There is no way around having another lockdown, but there is a way to prevent us ever having a lockdown again. The way we prevent us ever having a lockdown again is zero COVID, UBI, test, trace, isolate in public hands. Okay? Then we will never have a lockdown again. And this lockdown won't be too long. If not, get ready. We're going to be having a cycle of lockdowns from now to late summer, if not further. That's how stark the choice is. We have a political class completely devoid of ideas, of any thinking outside of the box. And that has really harmed us. And the fact we have an opposition that is nowhere near as ambitious as the previous opposition is really damaging, because they're too scared to say anything. Put aside talk of electoral expediency or who's more likely to win an election. The last leader of the Labour Party and that front bench would have challenged the government and pushed them in new directions by being absolutely bold and fearless in proposing radical solutions to this. And in doing so, they would have made the government a better government. So, for all the talk of effective forensic opposition, if you actually look at it, the opposition that achieved the most was the last opposition. They pushed the economic norms. This opposition is going along with the government, therefore the government is shoddier than it would be if Jeremy Corbyn was in opposition. Like that, let's not talk about what the polls would be doing. I don't know what the polls would be saying, but I know that the government would be a better government if Jeremy Corbyn was in opposition, proposing things that made them uncomfortable enough and resonated enough to make them move a little bit in one direction or another. Keep them on their toes. Any government would have done better than this, really. The Theresa May administration would have done better. The Tony Blair government would likely have done better. All within limits, though. They'd be more competent, quote unquote, but they would still be wedded to the neoliberal ideology that has led to the atomisation, the privatisation of public services, the shrinking of the welfare state that has led to where we are now. The Cameron government would have done better. The Thatcher government would likely have done better. But I do maintain that the government best placed to handle a situation such as this would have been the hypothetical Corbyn government that could have been elected last December. That government would have completely thrown out the old orthodoxies. It would have approached things on the basis of human need and well-being, and likely we'd have come out of the other side of it with an entirely different structured economy, a universal basic income, and any number of other provisions that would have allowed us to very likely just be running around in a club with no distancing right about now. I saw a tweet the other day. It was like, if you'd voted for Corbyn, we'd be lip-syncing the love of our lives in a club right now. And it's sort of true. Highly likely we'd have ended up more like a New Zealand and less like, well, an America. Alas, we are where we are. That's the state of play right now. I sincerely hope it's not as bad as I say, and I see no evidence dictating otherwise. Now, Joe Biden has admonished the Trump administration. President-elect Joseph Biden said on Monday that his transition team had faced obstruction from the Defense Department, raising new concerns about the Trump administration's cooperation with transition officials with just over 3 weeks until Inauguration Day. In a statement, the acting Defense Secretary, Christopher C. Miller, defended the department's level of cooperation with the Biden team. He said the department was continuing to, quote, schedule additional meetings for the remainder of the transition and answer any and all requests for information in our purview. Our DoD political and career officials have been working with the utmost professionalism to support transitional activities in a compressed time schedule, and they will continue to do so in a transparent and collegial manner that upholds the finest traditions of the department. The American people expect nothing less, and that is what I expect to remain committed to. We'll hear what Biden had to say.
For some agencies, our teams received exemplary cooperation from the career staff in those agencies. From others, most notably the Department of Defense.
Sorry about that. That is shockingly quiet. Let's see if I can make that louder. This should be louder.
We have encountered roadblocks from the political leadership at the Department of Defense and the Office of Management and Budget. Right now, we just aren't getting all the information that we need for the outgoing administration in key national security areas. It's nothing short, in my view, of irresponsibility. And the truth is, many of the agencies that are critical to our security have incurred enormous damage. Many of them have been hollowed out in personnel, capacity, and in morale, in the policy processes that have atrophied or have been sidelined, in the despair of our alliances and the disrepair of those alliances. But right now, there's an enormous vacuum. We're going to have to regain the trust and confidence of a world that has begun to find ways to work around us or work without us.
Someone says, don't think Biden even knew what he had to say. The jokes are not getting old. You know, I'm actually not sick of the Biden senile jokes because there's more than a grain of truth in them. But yeah, that's what Joe Biden had to say. And look, of course, we're dealing with deeply, deeply irresponsible, deeply silly people that will do whatever the president says, and the president will stop at nothing to cause chaos, destruction, and basically bring down the house with him on the way out. Expect booby traps planted all over the White House, you know. Whoopee cushions in the Oval Office. Like, this lot are... It's a set of deeply, deeply unserious people. And the Biden people are deeply, deeply serious people. Sometimes sinister, but very, very much serious people. Whereas the Trump administration, the reason the Trump administration has failed to pull off a coup is because it's stacked with deeply silly, deeply misinformed, misguided, incompetent people who couldn't, organise a piss-up in a brewery, basically. That's why most of the damaging excesses of the Trump administration have been mitigated, because they just don't know what they're doing. The Obama administration, elements of that transition were good, but they were hardly welcoming. They seemed sort of like they viewed the incoming Trump administration as some sort of foreign imposter. And they carried on with the Russia stuff. They carried on with this, carried on with that. So the Obama administration hardly handled the transition great, but they were never this obstructionist. Of course, there are allegations of spying and things like that, which, again, who knows? Maybe. Which would be, right, like, the Obama administration spied, if it did, and then, the Trump administration is trying to derail the transition altogether. There is a worse evil there, but yeah, both pretty foul administrations. And this administration is likely to be foul as well, of course. This has been a historically bad transition. There have been plenty of transitions like this, but many of them, you've got to go back more than 100 years. It's good to see Biden wake up to the uselessness of the administration he's dealing with. The fact we haven't seen him or Trump stand near each other still baffles me, but it looks like the transition is essentially a non-starter in most ways, apart from, behind-the-scenes cooperation. They'll be fine. They will be fine, the Biden administration, because the Trump administration was unpredictable, because it was wedded to the military-industrial complex, but it wasn't quite as interventionist as typical US administrations. Because of all that, broadly, the deep state would definitely preferred a Biden administration. So all the infrastructure embedded in the US government will be willing to work with Biden in a way perhaps it wasn't with Trump. So in that sense, he will be okay. As well, looking at the vote on the 2000 stimulus checks, again, I challenge Republican officials to vote against that. I hope they don't. If they do, I want to see the president, I want to see the president-elect, and I want to see the entire Democratic caucus in the Senate and the House stand up and condemn the cowardice. And I hope that can be very much pinned, the responsibility for that very much pinned on the Republican senators that are currently in the fight of their lives for re-election in Georgia. That would, of course, be David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler. Trump is vying for attention. He's desperate for attention. He knows he is an old story. He knows he is on the way out. Therefore, he's trying to bring down the House with him. It's working. Turn on CNN. It's all Trump, right? They love to hate him. They love to hate the guy. Everything is Trump's fault. If you watch CNN. It is very much Trump derangement syndrome. Even people who acknowledge how god-awful Trump is. Trump derangement syndrome is a thing. And, I mean, watching it unfold is, oh, Lord, horrendous and over the top. Last story of the day. Stick around for this, by the way. It's bloody worth it. The UK's military is expected to embark on a new armed drone programme in response to Azerbaijan's controversial use of the technology in its victory over Armenia in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Defence officials believe that Azerbaijan's use of cheaper Turkish drones in the 6-week autumn war was crucial in defeating the Armenians and forcing them to cede control of territory in the disputed Caucasus region. The Ministry of Defence officials added that the UK wanted to procure its own cheaper drones as part of the 5-year defence review due to be unveiled early in 2021, despite warnings about the risks of the proliferation of deadly unmanned aircraft. Earlier this month, the UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said that the Turkish TB2 drones were an example of how other countries are now leading the way. So we're heading in a very worrying direction. I think it would be pretty safe to say this is not what you want to hear on a Tuesday afternoon. So, waste of time and money, first of all, if we do this. It's an absolute waste of time. It's a waste of resources. It's a waste of cash. Awful, awful, awful. This is, it's what the Obama administration excelled at. Drones killing people. That's the big idea for global Britain on the post-Brexit world stage. I'm not surprised, but I am appalled. we are increasingly heading towards some sort of vision of a techno-dystopia where we are killed by metal objects flying in the sky from 5 miles away with precision right through the skull. That is modern warfare. The most vulnerable around the world suffer. Often we get the wrong people. Often, and just broadly, it is a barbaric way to deal with things. It's a step closer to a world of assassination and violence and away from a world of cooperation and peace. It should be opposed wholeheartedly, and it is very much a sign of Tory priorities. The left, or indeed the Labour Party, don't know if that's the left anymore, should oppose that on this basis. On the basis that we have veterans sleeping on the street. We have children in Britain going to food banks. We have in-work poverty at record highs. How about we deal with all that? Crumbling infrastructure, useless railway system, climate emergency. How about we deal with all those things before we even consider injecting money into flying kill machines to massage the bruised ego of an ageing middle-aged man at the Defence Department who can't please his wife the same way he used to be able to. That's essentially what this is, right? It's like very much an ego thing to satisfy the macho instincts of Britain's military officials. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. There's no need for it. It will not make me or anyone else in this country any safer. Certainly won't make people in other troubled parts of the world any safer. It'll put them in immediate danger of death. Sets on course a very worrying precedent that could eventually lead back to this country. Will lead back to this country. So no, stop it. We really are a mini USA, aren't we? We are becoming a mini USA. Political system's becoming more presidential. We have our own Trump, and we're killing people with drones and breaking laws. Just the most American thing I've ever heard. And on that note, that's just about it. We're coming up to 7:30. Let me know what you thought of anything and everything we talked about on the show today. If you disagree with me, offer your disagreements, and we'll have a dialogue about it without shouting at each other. So get in touch in the chat. Remember, I will be back 7 p.m. tomorrow right here. So subscribe, tell your friends, and set notifications on so you do not miss a new edition, another edition of MesmePolitics. My name has been Toby Lepati Mesme, and we have been bringing you all the latest.
Prepare to die.
All the latest in UK and US politics from a leftist perspective. Again, as I always say, we like to offer a completely unique way of doing things, a unique perspective. I don't think you'll find anything quite like it. There are things similar to this, but there's nothing quite like this out there. We want to grow the audience. Every time we do this show, we have more people listening, but we want to grow it. We want to expand. We want your suggestions as to anything we can talk about, so please email us, tobyjoshua2004@gmail.com. What's working about this? What do you like? What's not working? What you're not too keen on? What areas should we focus on? What questions should we be trying to answer? And don't worry, I know it is looking bleak going into the new year, but 2021 may be the turning point, should be the turning point in the fight against this virus. It's just going to be a difficult beginning, and just remember this, we will be here every step of the way, bringing you all the latest in a responsible way. We won't spread conspiracy theories, we won't spread rumours, we'll get the information out to you and then offer a unique analysis that is unaffected by flows of corporate money or neoliberal bias in the media. We're you know, no one's bought me yet. I don't know how high the price is, but meaning there's not a price, I promise. 5 billion. Can you imagine? No, but yeah, good. You can get me on Twitter at TobyJoshuaUK. I'll see you tomorrow, 7 p.m. Subscribe, notifications. You'll get notified when we go live again. Check out Medium. On Medium, where I write every day, generally several political articles. I am at Toby Joshua Politics. Thank you to everyone who's listened. Thank you to everyone who sent messages in. Thank you to everyone who's got involved. Thank you to everyone who's spent the last half hour with us. And I'll see you very soon.